President for Research, Impact and Innovation, joining us at some part of the proceedings. She had a clash, but she does hope to join us around 12 noon. So if she does, we'll acknowledge her and her entrance at some point. We very much hope, and I think Tanita is willing to take questions and queries on this. We really hope this will be an interactive discussion as much as we can make it. Because we have quite a large number of people here on our call today, we will ask you to use the raise hand function if you do want to ask a question or to comment during the interactive part of the discussion. So without further ado, Tanita, could I ask you to go ahead then and tell us about your research culture initiative in Glasgow. We're very interested, and I think we're all delighted and will be very anxious to hear from you.
Thank you, Grace, and hello everybody. I am going to share my screen and go through a few slides with you, and there'll be plenty of time for discussion. Hopefully you can see that. So I'm Tanita, I'm the Head of Research Policy at the University of Glasgow, and I'm effectively there the Head of Office for the Vice President for Research, I suppose as you would call it at UCD. And so my responsibility spans all areas and all areas of remit of the research strategy. So that includes recruitment of our strategic leaders or fellows, how we evaluate research, how we develop our staff, and more generally creating the environment in which researchers can succeed. And so the culture work fits quite neatly and aptly within that broader remit. The Research Culture Programme at Glasgow started maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and we are very keen to emphasise that culture is not that thing you do on the side, but it actually helps us to do better quality research. And coming as it was from the Office of the Vice Principal for Research, it was easy for us to convince others that that is what we were doing. So we've done a number of initiatives, as Grace said, and I will describe them here. But this is less of a marketing slide and more really an opportunity to help you. And so towards the end of the talk, there is a bit of a sort of deconstruction of how we went about what we did, hopefully to allow you to map onto what we've done, the interests that you have here, or the culture you have locally, the ambitions you have for culture, and then that will hopefully lead us into that discussion. So the first thing I always say, and possibly the most important thing I'm going to say, is that it's very important to define what you mean by research culture in your institution or in your local area. It's something that people care very passionately about, and it's something that I suppose colleagues interpret in different ways. From dignity at work, to equality and diversity, to how we evaluate research quality, to how we develop staff and support careers, career precarity, and so on. And it's virtually impossible to do it all, or to do it all well. And so I would urge anybody starting on this journey to be very clear about what it is that they value, and then align all the actions and communications to furthering those values. So this is how we've done it at the University of Glasgow. This may differ from what you are keen on doing or end up doing, but we want to create an environment in which colleagues are recognised and valued for their varied contributions to research. There are different ways of contributing to research. It might be from individuals from different disciplines, from different sectors, from different job families, and there are different types of research that they may well do. And so we want to reward and recognise the plurality of those contributions, but also products. We also want to create an environment in which we support each other's careers, and I will say quite a bit more about that. We want to create a community in which we benefit from each other's experience and talents and networks. And we also want to create an environment that supports work that meets the highest standards of academic rigour. Okay, there's little point recognising contributions and supporting each other if we're not producing work that actually stands a test of time and that actually supports one's career. So we have aligned everything that we do to furthering these 3 priorities. And as I said, they may differ for you, but we found it very useful to do this. And partly, and actually mainly, because there's so much interest across the institution that of all the things they could do, if we have a clear focus, then they will do or align what their interests are to where the support and expertise and focus is at institutional level. And this is just to reiterate what I said at the very beginning, which is that we consider research culture to be fundamental to our research excellence agenda. And so we say wherever we can that a better research culture is not an alternative to excellence, but rather it is what will enable more of us to excel. It really is a mechanism for improving the quality of our research and increasing participation in research of high quality. One of the things we bump into when talking about research culture is all the other things that people do want to have happen in the university that will make their lives better. And so our action plan around research culture has been defined around 5 different pillars that you see in the sort of central box there, around research integrity, around collegiality, which we define as supporting each other to succeed, research recognition, which is about valuing different contributions, but also ensuring that we are fair in our assessment of research quality, research careers, broadly speaking, centred around the researcher concordat, and open research. And so these are all actions and activities and initiatives that are quite tightly linked to the practice of doing research, and less so around values that might apply more broadly to all of our university community. You know, I don't know what your university values are, let's say they're ambition or excellence or equality, but also things that, you know, we do not qualify as or count as culture, like, you know, the car parking. All of these things make life easier, but we distinguish those from those that are specifically related to culture. So I would urge, I think, anyone embarking on this to define it in a focused manner, almost unapologetically focused, and to align the actions to the practice of doing research. So the University of Glasgow, we're not very policy heavy. We really rely an awful lot on actions, lots of actions, and actions that all point in the same direction. We have put together a little video that explains to our community what it is we're trying to do and what actions we want to put in place. And we also published a statement on research culture that basically communicated to our community what we've done, what we're going to do, and how we will measure progress in our actions. And we also formally have a 5-year culture action plan that's centred around the 5 pillars that I have just shown. And this is just a bit of a timeline of those 5 pillars. We actually began this journey back in 2015 by looking at our research integrity. And we looked at everything to do with research integrity at that point. It was the leadership, it was the policies, it was the communication, and that was really the kernel for so much of the activities that followed. And we've now come back full circle and are going to be looking at research integrity again. We followed that up with collegiality, embedding a requirement for collegiality within our promotions criteria. Our career development support through the 3-year action plan to support the careers concordat. We benefited greatly from the action plan in supporting our recovery from COVID, because that was I guess the most pressing activity was to support the careers of our postdocs who were affected by lack of productivity over lockdown. Research recognition, as I said, is around measuring what matters, and then open research, which we'll be focusing on heavily over the course of this year, now that our library colleagues are freed up from REF. And of course, all of these different initiatives are connected to each other in some shape or form, but it helps in the delivery and the planning of them to consider them in these 5 different pillars. So I mentioned that we align our actions as much as possible, and we talk about them in these terms. We say that our actions support what we value through our expertise, through our funding, through, I guess, the people that we hire. We reward what we value, so we make culture work for people's careers. We then celebrate what we value, and we monitor how we are doing. So we evaluate so that we're continually improving our provision, our reward system, the expertise, and the focus of what we do. So here's a few examples now of specific actions that we've done under those 4 headings. So in supporting what we value, quite a few years ago, we introduced some specialist career tracks to acknowledge that some of our researchers were not following the career route of a traditional PI. And so we created specialist career tracks for research scientists and for technologists, in which we acknowledged that their role was much more a collaborative one rather than a leading one. And we're talking here about people like statisticians or bioinformaticians. We also embedded the credit taxonomy within our institutional outputs repository. What the credit taxonomy does is give you a set of descriptors that allows authors on a manuscript to define quite easily what their role has been. And that allows us to put on record and therefore recognise the role of each collaborator and co-author within an output. We are a signatory of DORA and other manifestos. And in order to make that an easy process for our researchers to take up, we've developed a toolkit for our researchers to use, and that includes conversation starters. What we wanted to avoid is, the compliance with DORA, meaning that you never have discussions about your output strategy or about which audiences you're trying to reach. And so conversation starters are a handy tool for us to take our intent and our policies right down to the level of the researcher so that they, I suppose, are supported to know what they're going to do tomorrow that's different from what they're going to do today. We've taken a similar approach to supporting PIs, supporting the careers of our researchers. We have signed up, as I said, to the Careers Concordat, but that is, that in and of itself doesn't really get us very far without PIs engaging in the process. So we have produced a toolkit on what 10 days of CPD looks like, conversation starters for supporting the career aspirations of postdocs. We recently ran a scope workshop, which is run by the International Network of Research Managers, which really probes, we sought that out to allow us to probe more deeply what it is that we value about career support. And that was done with members of our community, and that allowed us to make changes to our recruitment toolkit so that support for careers was also embedded in the evaluation of our new recruits. And we're now also working with the sector on a community project around the narrative CV format. So narrative CV format is being piloted by several funders, including some of the UKRI councils. This is a CV that's in an expanded form and that mixes quantitative indicators, which much more qualitative indicators, and also looks at indicators that are broader than what we would normally consider in a traditional academic CV. So we are working with an external editor and with our ECR community to build up their CVs into a narrative CV, and in the process develop an enhanced template that makes it easier for members of the community to complete the CVs, but also guidance for how assessment panels might evaluate these CVs. And we'll make that available to the sector once it's finished in the autumn. We've embedded 29 research integrity advisors in each of our disciplines, and they are there to field any queries about good practice or concerns, and we work with them closely to ensure that they're aware of sector developments and for them to be more broadly aware of what's happening in the culture sphere as well, because it's all sort of joined up. And we've also taken advantage of quite substantial funds from the Scottish Funding Council to support careers and projects that have been affected as a result of COVID. And we have therefore put almost all of this money in supporting our careers, and that includes a scheme to address differential impact of COVID on projects and careers. And we ran that over February and March, and the report on that is on our website. So that's the support, and there's other things we can talk about in the discussion if you're interested. But I thought I'd move on to the second set of aligned actions, which is around rewarding what we value. And here I'm going to focus on the changes we made to our academic promotions criteria, which for the moment we focus solely on our professorial staff. So at Glasgow, research is assessed across 7 dimensions. It's the ones you expect: outputs, income, impact, leadership, and so on. And progression is preponderance based. So that means that you need to meet the criteria in 4 of the 7 dimensions in order to progress to the next level or wherever it is you're trying to be promoted to. It can be any 4, okay? And that allows us to emphasize that it's not required to be excellent at everything. You can contribute to the research quality of the institution in different ways. We updated our promotions criteria, and first of all, we provided parity of credit for outputs and impact. And this is important in terms of our aim of valuing different contributions to research. So one of the 4 dimensions that we require the criteria to be met can be either outputs or impact. We've also embedded within our promotions criteria a reward for those who support the careers of others. So we require anyone applying for promotion to demonstrate how they have supported careers, how have they demonstrated collegiality. And we provided examples of what that might mean. So it might mean being a senior PI on a grant where a more junior colleague is leading. It might mean nominating others for peer recognition, such as prizes, or giving up a keynote to somebody in a more junior role, or acting as a second supervisor when a more junior colleague is acting as primary supervisor of a PGR student. So we provided these examples, and it was a pass-fail. You know, we didn't try to grade collegiality. Okay. We're also, wherever we can, not just in promotions, but also in annual appraisals, for example, and also we're going to be doing that within our recruitment, is ensure that we always combine quantitative evidence with a narrative. And that allows a much more balanced appraisal of one's performance. We've also required a commitment to open research practices. And again, we've given examples of what that might mean as appropriate to the discipline. And emphasize, as per our research strategy, that we value the quality of our work over our quantity. And here's just an example of where we bring all of this together outside of our promotions system. This is the application form for our internal fellowships, for independent research fellowships. And so we ask applicants to indicate their 4 more significant publications. So we don't want to know the whole list, just the 4 most notable ones. And for them to highlight in just 3 sentences or 100 words total, why that output was significant, how it's advanced the field, but also what their contribution was to that piece of work. Again, wishing to acknowledge and to reward contributions without the use of things that don't make any sense, like journal impact factors. And we invite them to use the credit taxonomy if they want to articulate their contribution to the work. And as well as doing that, we also ask them to document their commitment to open research. So I'm listing this because these are ways in which the priorities that we've set about are seen wherever, I suppose, people turn. In celebrating what we value, we mainly do that through our Research Culture Awards. These are awards that we've been running now for 3 years, and the latest set of awardees were announced last week. The awards recognise individuals or teams from any job family or any career stage who improve culture. And that might mean in their immediate vicinity, it might be in the discipline within the sector. And this allows us to showcase good practice, but also share good practice and share case studies of what people could be doing to inspire others to do things locally. And of course, we don't want to stand still. We don't want to assume that what we're doing is useful. And so we do measure how we are doing in various ways, but more formally around our culture survey. We ran the first one in 2019, and we would have run one last year if it hadn't been a particularly special year. And so we're about to launch this year's this month. And what does that tell us? Well, what it's told us from the 2019 results is that there's a lot of variation across our different disciplines, and I think this is to be expected. So just to describe what we're looking at here, the rows are some of the questions we asked, and the columns are our various departments. So you can see here, the ones that are a bit more blue are the ones where the responses were a bit more favourable. The ones that are mostly red are the ones where the answers were less favourable. And I think that's completely expected, and I think it would be a fantasy to suggest that you have a uniform culture across your institution. But what we also see by looking at the horizontal bars is that there are some areas in which the colleagues in the university feel quite confident over, like authorship practice here, and others where that understanding or comfort with that topic is a bit more variable. For example, understanding what a good quality output means. And that gives us a bit of a sense of where institutionally things have been working, or where awareness raising has worked, and also where it's more patchy, but also gives us ideas for where the intervention points could be. So for example, when we're looking at what a good quality output means, that's not something that I will be able to do institutionally. It's something that the local leadership will need to take upon themselves to do. And this is just one other data point from that survey. The green bars here indicate the sort of areas in which our researchers felt particularly confident, as in they knew more than they wanted to know. And so that's about open access, open research, research identifiers, good research data management. And these are all things that, like many institutions, we have invested in quite early and quite plentifully, and that we've done quite a lot of communications around. And so I think we were quite pleased to see that it was quite visible. These activities and support mechanisms were visible in the community. And then there were others where researchers felt they needed to know more. And that includes things about how to write a good output, how quality is assessed, and how to improve research profile. And so these are areas that we know are for action. So in terms of how to go about this, or how we went about it and what I would recommend to you, what is the best way of identifying what you value and what your culture priorities might be? And an easy way of doing this is to run a survey, because the process of thinking about the survey itself will help you narrow down your interests to the ones that are relevant. It's useful when doing that to ask questions that you can do something about. I think if you ask questions about, do you think career precarity is a problem, then I think you're not really going to get anything meaningful out of that. On the other hand, if you ask, do you know where to go if you have a concern about research integrity, then you're going to get information that you can possibly act on. And a survey is always an opportunity to inform. So while you're canvassing opinion, you can always inform your community about the support mechanisms and priorities that you have in place. You can either substitute or supplement a survey with a town hall or a workshop with the community. And we did that a couple of times, in which we didn't just use the community from Glasgow, but actually the community in the sector more broadly, from other institutions, from the funders, from government, from the publishers. And that helps to maybe consolidate some of the thoughts that have emerged out of your survey. It helps to align to sector drivers. Okay, there are things that people will listen to that are being done in the sector, whether it's REF, funder policies, Athena Swan. But there's probably no substitute from starting from what you know about your community. I think it helps to lead your community where you think they're prepared to be led, rather than taking them somewhere really quite far away. So when we were doing our collegiality, when we introduced collegiality, that was the fruit of a lot of contact and a lot of visits to our schools, where they told us that, they didn't like the individualistic culture that was being developed, not just in the institution, but more broadly. And is there something that we could do to bring out the support that people provided for each other? And so when we introduced collegiality, it was just giving back what they told us. Very important, I think, to think about who will deliver the actions that you have set up. I think it's much better to deliver almost that your second best project with an available team than it is to insist on your best project when you've got nobody to help you do it. And that's something I would emphasize quite strongly. And also in setting the priorities for culture, to be mindful that they need to work across different disciplines and areas. There'll be some issues that will be very well known to some parts of the university, for example, some of the STEM subjects, but the priorities need to be understood and need to be relevant across all of the disciplines. And so set them at the right level. They're not so vague, but they're not so specific that they exclude people. Certainly my experience both at Glasgow and mainly speaking with other institutions like similar to yourselves, is that the language matters. Sometimes certain words don't resonate. Improvement is not something that people tend to take kindly to. Change is also something that doesn't often work quite well. So best to test that out before you go out on your comms campaign. And if you need more inspiration, you might have probably seen the Russell Group Toolkit that came out last month with lots of ideas and case studies of what institutions have done and the sort of priorities that you might set up and how you might measure them. But as a general rule of thumb, this might be a good guide. You probably want something to do with research practice, so integrity, open research practices, transparency and openness, and research methods. Something to do with research assessment. How fairly do we evaluate what we're doing? It could be your adherence to sector manifestos. It could be about ensuring that you are valuing different types of research, data, software, impact, and valuing the collaboration and teamwork. And something to do with careers. You know, it could be about the stability of careers, it could be the development, how you track your destinations, how you set expectations, how you induct colleagues into your culture. And if I had some tips for implementation, I've said this already, be as consistent as you possibly can. It helps with amplifying your message and getting buy-in from others. And doing activities at different scales. Some of the things we've done have been relatively small, others have been politically very expensive, like changing our promotions criteria, and others are financially expensive, for example, around fellowship schemes and other forms of input like that. And also maybe don't forget that there are probably things that you are doing already that do fall under the definition of culture that you will come up with, and that these can be rebadged or realigned with what you're doing to illustrate what you're trying to achieve. It can be tempting, I think, to solve the problem, but sometimes you just need to go back and create a better environment in which those problems don't arise. And sometimes that's a more palatable way of approaching some of your colleagues. Related to that is not to start with your biggest problem. You probably know what that is, and you'll probably get a lot of buy-in in trying to solve it, but it might not be the most doable thing. You might want to put that on the back burner until you've got a bit of street cred with some of your other actions. It takes a long time. You know, we've been doing this for quite a long time, and things fall into place. And I think I would say not just to be patient, but be confident that ideas will present themselves when you get started, rather than having it all mapped out at the start. Respect the fact that you can't have a sort of uniform culture across your disciplines, and actually it would probably be unfair to do so, because each discipline operates within the discipline in the sector, and they may have certain priorities or certain places that they cannot go at some particular point. And so to be confident really that if each discipline operates in accordance with your priorities and does so at different rates and different ways, that's still okay. I've mentioned the delivery teams, but I'm saying it again because it's really, really important to have those delivery teams and to work effectively with them. And something that we learned possibly too late in the day is to communicate at every stage of what you are doing. There are lots of things that people are paying attention to rather than you. And so both internally and externally, to ensure that not just what you're doing, but how it all fits together is clear to your community. My other advice would be to make it easy. You know, nobody's going to really object to an improved culture, but how do they go from what you're seeing, which they agree with what they're going to do tomorrow? And as I've said before, we have taken, you know, we have actually taken advantage of conversation starters to take those policies to individuals. And also to consider the power of pilot experiments. You know, they're usually low barrier to implementation, they tend to cost less, people are less suspicious about what you're trying to do if you're doing it as a pilot.
It's about host-pathogen interactions and using the zebrafish as a model to study intracellular pathogens and their interactions.
Interference there.
Thanks, Ned, over to you.
Okay.
For a nice introduction. I hope you can hear me well because my headphones.
Cormac, you need to mute there. Make sure that their microphone is muted. Thanks, guys.
So yeah, I'm very happy to talk to you today, and I'm very honored to
Okay. Great, so pilots. And I just wanted to touch now on leadership and governance. We often get asked, is it top down, is it bottom up, where do you start? So it depends a little bit on your existing culture. You know, do people listen when you've got the policy, or do people follow when there's some actions that they like? At Glasgow, the agenda is led, as I said, from the Office of the Pro-Vice-Chancellor for Research, which is effectively the office that I am in. The direction did come top down in a sense, in that the priorities that were set with the community are driven top down. But so much of the activities are happening within our communities, and we use that, as I said, with regards to the culture awards and so on, to showcase and share good practice. And we're very pleased that actually in many of the initiatives are now being developed within our colleges. So for example, one of our colleges has set up their own Concordat working group to deal with the particular issues that research-only staff are experiencing within that research area. Your research committee could be overseeing these activities. We have a separate governance, a separate group that feeds into our university research committee. We call it the Research Culture and Careers Group. And that brings together all of the different strands on delivery teams that contribute to culture. So our HR, our integrity, our research office, as well as our faculty-based research support teams. We didn't really create separate roles for this. Many institutions have deans for research culture and so on. We basically did it from within our existing roles. That's not to say that won't work for you. And then a couple of points that we've picked up from speaking with other institutions, which is, you know, there's going to come a point quite soon in which culture is going to get competitive, both externally but also internally. And I think it pays, I think, to ensure that we practice what we preach, that as many people who want to get involved can get a role and that they get credit for that involvement, and to be as open as possible for what we do. It's not just about our institutions improving their culture, it's also being part of a broader network so that the sector can progress together. And so in the case of Glasgow, Miles, who was the previous Pro-Vice Chancellor for Research and with whom I developed so much of this work, he and I are the co-leads for research culture. And it was important for us to show that collaborative element of an academic and a professional services staff working together and valuing what we each bring to those roles. Here's just by way of illustration our research culture and career groups. And what we also did as a structure to deliver our culture work is to launch a lab for academic culture. We did that at the end of last year. We deliberately called it academic culture to move beyond research culture and to embrace our learning and teaching activities as well. It has 3 roles. It's a home for all our projects. It's a place where people can go to learn more about what we're doing, but also a home for all of the different delivery teams that are part of this, that sit within different offices and different faculties. We also use that formally to monitor and evaluate the progress that we're making, but also working with the sector. I mentioned the narrative CV, but also we work collaboratively with other universities as well to try and create a more coordinated approach to advancing culture. And we do our projects not by bringing in staff, but actually bringing in secondees, either from our research community or our professional services community to work on short-term projects. And if you're interested in doing anything, then absolutely come and speak with us. More broadly though, where do we want to get to? And I think what we want to get to is a change in what we value in our research. You know, we fundamentally, you know, as a sector, approve of and support good quality outputs and increasingly reward our impact on society. But perhaps we've been given less emphasis than we should have on the people and the people that we support within our system, not just to make them successful within our system, but also to provide skills for the economy at large. And this is a pillar that I think will be increasingly important in, at least in the UK research evaluation framework. And here's a quote from Ottiline Laser, who's the CEO of UKRI, talking here about the notion of one's net contribution to research. So not just the contribution to research that one makes, but also the contribution to research that one enables in others. And it's a good concept to carry around. One of the things that has recently happened, certainly in the UK, is that the Universities UK, UKRI and the Wellcome Trust have launched a call for a project team to look at integrating all of our various sector concordats and agreements. And here's a list of the ones that we are dealing with. The challenge here is that they've all sort of come about without really reference to each other. And so there's a bit of redundancy, as well as gaps, as well as lack of information as to whether they're working. And so this is a 4-month project that they're going to do to basically blend all of this in a way. And I think this will be very helpful to the sector because it will start to set the priorities for what our basic requirements for culture are when it comes to good practice, when it comes to open research, when it comes to how we evaluate research quality, and how we support diversity within our systems. And so we're looking forward to the outcomes of that in October. And actually I'm on the challenge group for that feeds into the board. And just really my last slide here is to say that we've been at this culture stuff for quite some time, and we also recently published a research strategy in October where culture is a fundamental part of that in terms of supporting careers, working with others, valuing contributions. And so the culture work and the culture action plan is now a formal substream of our university research strategy. And so I'll end there and I'll share the slides later. I just put a bunch of links here for people you might want to follow on Twitter or websites you might want to visit for further inspiration.
Thank you very much, Tanita. A really great snapshot of the fantastic work done under your leadership and that of Miles at the University of Glasgow. I guess at UCD, unlike yourselves, we're really at the beginning of this journey in that, you know, we've started thinking about this only formally in this way only quite recently. However, we do share in common with you that our recently published research strategy, Shaping the Future, also includes a nice piece on research culture and valuing the people. So at least we have that in common, although I think we've got a long way to go to really put into action some of those actions and initiatives that you've described there. Again, from the UCD context, we have started and are at the very beginning of an 18-month project on research culture, and we can talk then during discussion, if you like, about some of the initiatives we have planned during that. And I think some of them have very much been inspired by what we've heard from your story at Glasgow. But I'd like to invite at this point any questions or comments on Tanita's presentation. I know Adrian and Jill will help me monitor the raised hand function here, and I really do encourage all of you to take up this opportunity to ask Tanita about her experience in Glasgow and about the things that you think might work in UCD and about any questions you have on her presentation. So this is the valley of death when no one asks any questions. And I'm
a lot of people are warming up their vocal cords. I should say I'm also happy to talk about the things that we're planning, you know, and I didn't want to, you know, go on and on, and so I focus on the things that we've done, but obviously thoughts are ongoing. So happy, but I see lots of hands, so I'll shut up now.
Well, I'll start off because I certainly have a question, and I know one of the things that's been exercising me a little bit is bringing together all the various actors and people that can contribute to the kinds of culture initiatives we'd like to run. And I think we have certainly taken your advice and will be forming a steering committee now, which includes or will include representatives from HR, lots of other functions, as well as UCD research and others on our research integrity, if you like, core working group. And again, obviously UCD, HR, and a lot of the things we do is very much about people. And I suppose I wanted to ask you and perhaps some of our UCD HR colleagues who are on the call here, whether or not there have been any difficulties in aligning those, whether it's all worked smoothly or whether there have been any miscommunications or assumptions along that road, or has it been an easy journey to try and integrate what the research culture, if you like, initiatives are doing versus what is happening naturally and normally as part of HR developments and so on?
Well, I can maybe go first and talk about our experience. I guess, again, HR functions are probably distributed in different ways in different institutions. So in our case, the research or development component actually sits within the research office. And that was where we started. And that was an easy access point to a lot of, I suppose, a lot of the projects that had to do with careers. Where we did interface with HR was around the promotions criteria, obviously. And in that sense, they were very generous in that they just took their hands off it and went, here you go, you do the consultation. And then we interface with them and obviously making sure that it aligned with the changes they were making to the other promote. So they'd initiated the change to the promotions criteria, and we said we have ideas for what we would like to do, and they very graciously let us do that, and then we integrated it. Another entry point, which is very useful to us into HR, with our equality and diversity. So we see that was an important one for us, because we already interface through the Athena Swan. And sometimes what happened during the Athena Swan discussions is that you end up a little bit in a conflict between priorities or directions, because on the one hand, your Athena Swan is wanting to encourage more people into an academic, let's say more women into an academic career. Whereas what we're trying to say with the Researcher Concordat is there's loads of careers out there, and the academic one might not be the most suitable one. And so these are colleagues that we were mixing with in other settings as well. Another contact point was around systems, so systems data. For example, one of the things that we're looking at the moment is how to track number of days of CPD that a postdoc would undertake within our HR system. So that was a useful point. Points of friction, we might as well be honest here. Yeah, messing about with stuff too often doesn't go down well, and I guess that's perfectly sensible.
Yeah.
I think we are now, we had to wait our turn in trying to introduce some of these things within our annual appraisals. We would have liked to align, having done the promotions, do the appraisals, do the recruitment, and these things have to take their turn. So I think it's just being mindful of where the existing plans are, and again, having the patience to align with existing timescales rather than trying to drive the whole thing.
Right. Okay. Thanks, Tanita. And the vocal cords, it seems, have been largely warmed up now. So there is a list of queries coming in. I'm going to start though with Rory from UCD-HR, and perhaps Rory, it'd be a good time for you to come in now in view of the last topic that we discussed there.
Yeah. Thanks, Grace. Hopefully you can all hear me there. And thanks, Tanita, for the presentation. Just a few comments I would have. Just overall, I think that career structures wise, I think there are differences between the UK model and the Irish model, particularly for non-traditional research roles. I think it's probably a bit more advanced in the UK in terms of maybe the alternative roles that can be provided. So I think that's a fairly significant factor that needs to be borne in mind here. We have made a lot of progress in UCD on the careers, research careers framework, and we would have been the leading university in the country around that when we started out on that journey. So we do have a very positive story to tell in the research culture space around research careers here in Ireland. Mm-hmm. I suppose it is a question of the sectoral dimension to it would need to be considered, I believe, in terms of how we enhance alternative roles in this whole area. So I think that's a very, very big piece of work on the HR front that would need to be collaboratively driven. I think the second main point I just want to make, and I think you touched on it at the end, Tanita, in your presentation, is around integration. Basically we're very, as a sector, I think we're very initiative focused, my team actually has responsibility for Athena Swan in UCD as well. So, there are a huge number of overlaps between, what you've been talking about here, and also another team that reports to me is in the promotions area. So there's a huge amount of activity going on at a university level. So my concern would be around duplication and even triplication and all the rest of it. So I think the biggest piece of work initially in this whole space, certainly from a HR point of view outside of the careers piece, which I think we can contribute to very proactively, is around a mapping exercise to make sure that activities that are already underway are captured, and that we're not actually tripping ourselves up. Like the last thing, in fact, that I think a lot of people need in the university at the moment is another survey, for example. So surveys are actually really valuable, but they have to be done in a very targeted way. We do a lot of surveys, with Athena Swan, with cultural surveys, working from home surveys, so we have to be careful how we target those. So step one for me anyway, from a HR point of view, is a consolidation exercise. So when this group is established, we need to map all the activities that are already underway and leverage those really, I think, for this group, you know, to actually take advantage of. For me, the biggest audience that we need to focus on are the PI community. You know, their development is really, really essential to understanding what culture is. Not within UCD, I think EDI and dignity and respect forms part of everybody's role. So, you know, I think in terms of how we actually engage with PIs around issues like that, huge value, I think, around that in terms of going forward. So for me, the key words here are careers and how we enhance people's careers outside of the non-traditional route, and consolidation.
Thanks very much, Rory. Absolutely agree with you on the consolidation and the survey fatigue. And indeed, I think the HR input into our steering group will be really important to ensure that duplication doesn't happen. So I think we'll have to work quite hard, and indeed will, on that front. At this point now, I'd just like to break off from our questions just for a moment to welcome our Vice President for Research, Impact and Innovation, Professor Orla Feely, to the meeting. Orla, we're delighted that you're here, and indeed delighted for the great support you've given to our research culture initiative. Tanita has just finished her presentation. The meeting, though, is recorded and she's made her slides available. So hopefully you'll get a chance to listen back, and we hope to continue for another little while anyway with discussions, which I hope you'll find interesting if you're able to stay, Orla.
And thanks, Grace, and apologies, I had a previous engagement actually out of my front room, amazingly, so it was very unusual, and I kind of knew I might pick up a delay there as I did, so apologies, Tanita. I will certainly check out your presentation afterwards from the recording. As you know, this is really important to us in UCD. It's a central pillar of our strategy that we launched a few months ago. I want to pay great tribute to Grace, to Adrian, to Jill for the wonderful leadership that they are providing for the area. We have come across Glasgow's work in a few places now, and you know the way when you hear of somebody's name a number of times, it starts to tell you that maybe these guys have something that we need to know about. So we're delighted that you could join us, and we really want to learn from all that you're doing, from all that colleagues around the world are doing, so that we make sure that we are reflecting and indeed advancing best practice. Just to pick up on something Rory said there, Rory, I feel very strongly that working with your unit is going to be essential here. There's so many initiatives around culture going on in UCD at this time. Research culture is not just the same as what you're doing, but there's a very significant overlap, and we need to make sure that we're exploiting those synergies. So I'll be quiet now, not having heard the discussion, and I will listen intently to the questions as they go on.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Orla. Again, thanks so much for your support. So we have a few hands still raised there. Perhaps I could go to Derval Conroy first. You have your hand raised there.
Yes, sorry, I'm just going to unmute there. Thanks very much, Tanita. I found that fascinating, really, really useful. And I was particularly heartened to see your multiple references to the diversity of disciplines. I come from the arts and humanities, and invariably raise this issue at various meetings. And I was just wondering, I mean, as I'm sure you know, arts and humanities often feel that the models in place don't suit the same way, and they can't, as you repeatedly said. And I was just wondering, could you say a little bit about how arts and humanities particularly worked out? Or, for example, you mentioned the research fellowships. Were there ones that were you know, specifically earmarked for arts and humanities? How did that I mean, you mentioned quality a lot and the narrative CV, which is wonderful. It'd be great to see those things in place here. Yeah, so I just wondered, could you say a little bit about how that, I mean, you're nodding, so I guess you're...
Yeah, no, I recognise it's been one of the lovely surprises, I think, of doing our culture work, is the extent to which, so we have a college structure at University of Glasgow, and we have 4 colleges, of which one is our Arts and Humanities college. So when we initially set up our integrity champions and advisors, there was one champion for the Arts College and various advisors. And it was actually that group that took the integrity work that we were doing, which, you know, as you know, a lot of it is very STEM focused around, you know, around plagiarism, around fabrication, you know, and actually made it their own. And this is vital for us, and actually created a template for how all our culture work does, which is, okay, they understand the university's intent, they understand why it's important, and their role is to translate that into the community. So, for example, when it came to integrity, and I've got a link in the slide already, so you'll see it when I circulate it, they created their own priorities for research practice that resonated with the way in which research is done in arts and humanities. So, for example, if you are applying for grant funding, don't forget to include funds for clearing copyright of the images. Otherwise, you might end up printing images that then others will then pick on and want you to take out, and that will ruin your output. And so it was really just communicating the intent in a way that is relevant. And we've seen that in lots of other areas as well. So I just mentioned there the Concordat, the Careers Concordat. Our social science college has actually created their own Concordat implementation group to meet the needs of research-only staff in social sciences, which are very different from the career pyramids you might see in a STEM subject. And so what they've done, and I think arts are looking across and going, we might like to do that as well, is creating pools of our only staff, for example, which are on permanent contract that might be contracted out to different projects. It's a pilot, it might not work as intended, but it's an example of how the support and the expertise and the focus that the university has put in certain areas has been embraced by the local areas and then developed to make it their own. And so we were pleasantly surprised, especially around the integrity, as to how arts has embraced it. But it's true for the other parts of culture as well. So for example, even the credit taxonomy, which you think that must be for multi-author things. And so we're getting our English literature colleagues and our critical studies colleagues going, actually, that's starting to happen with us as well, in that there might be more than one author on a monograph, and we want to make sure that the individuals are given credit for the role that they have played, and that will be helpful in their future career. So the communication is quite important, and I said that at the end that we came a bit late to this, and so the fact that you've heard about us is because you did get our communications in gear, but I think internal communication is important as well, so that you don't give the opportunity to people to say that isn't anything to do with me. Just let's have this conversation again so we can emphasize how it might be useful for different places.
Yeah, thanks very much, Tanita. And I think, Derval, one of the things we've been very conscious of, even before we started this initiative, was the different dimensions, if you like, of research integrities across the different disciplines. And one of the things we've done actually is consulted with arts and humanities and had a couple of webinars on issues which might be relevant to research integrity in that dimension. So very good to hear that, you know, this has been raised. And I think we probably should be talking about research cultures rather than research culture singular. And we've had fantastic input and engagement with arts and humanities colleagues so far. And Derval, we'll be looking to you and to other colleagues to ensure that continues as well. So thanks very much for that. I'm going to move to a couple of the other questions now. And we have a question both from Cormac Taylor and from Maria Bagramian, who both spoke, as well as did Abeba Berhan, who's also on the call, on a recent panel discussion we had as part of the research strategy launch on mentorship. So I'm going to move to Cormac first and then Maria. Cormac.
That's great. Thank you very much, Grace, and thanks, Tanita. That was really interesting and refreshing, and I think important in terms of, you know, developing our understanding of research culture. There's just a couple of things that I wanted to sort of ask, maybe if you could develop on a little bit. The first of all, and I completely agree with this, that your contribution to the research culture, the research system, as you called it, in the quote that you gave, is partly what you do yourself, what you publish, what you contribute to the literature, if you like. But then as much is what you allow others or promote others to contribute to the literature. And I think it was a great quote as a governing sort of theme, I guess, to what you're saying. But it's obviously a much more difficult thing to measure. And you had a few examples there, but they're kind of crude, like going co-supervisor on a PhD doesn't necessarily mean you do an awful lot. I'm just wondering if you have some, and I think it's great to start doing that, but just being a little bit more, thinking a bit more deeply about exactly how to measure or how to at least assess the quality of how somebody contributes to the research system through the promotion of other people's careers, including things like the 360 review, where, you know, we're all very used to senior people reviewing junior people, but really the best way, or one of the great ways to do that, is to allow ourselves to be reviewed by the people that we have supported or not along the way. Do you have any further thoughts on that?
Yeah, so you're right, it is a little bit crude, but we actually held back from measuring collegiality. And I think it's an interesting one because we consulted quite widely, as you can imagine. There was no pushback in including it, But what we got was, well, you know, so our professorial zones are spread across 4 different zones. So thinking, well, what's zone 1 collegiality versus zone 4 collegiality? And we thought, no, that's not what we want to do at the outset. We want to make it a pass-fail, as in, we didn't know how engaged people would be. You know, they see it in the promotions and they go, oh, what's that? And actually everybody did, right? They thought, okay, the examples were there to stimulate some thought. And I think the whole process was put in place, not necessarily to change behaviour, but to reward behaviour that we knew was already happening and that we allowed people the space to document. Yeah. So we have not progressed that discussion and taking it to be much more quantitative, much more quantitative. And I think I would resist that. And I think more broadly, we probably do need to feel more comfortable with evaluating things a bit more qualitatively. And I'm confident-ish that as we progress the conversations internally, we will get to a higher level of sophistication around this, because the examples will not just be, here's kind of what you need to be doing, but actually, you know, here are grades of what you could be doing. And but it's, the onus is on us to create initiatives in which collegiality can be demonstrated. So to give you an example, I'll give you 2 examples. One is we're just about to launch a fund to just, you know, reinvigorate our research after COVID. You know, and what's that money for? That money is not just create some space and time to have good ideas and to collaborate. It's also on the form, bring someone with you who otherwise wouldn't have the opportunity. You know, so it becomes almost the norm. The second thing is we've got a big building going up. It's going to house 600 researchers. And we're developing a little toolkit whereby every PI going into that institution, into that building, which is a big research hub, needs to commit to certain culture actions, as it were. And so that process of sort of that toolkit will allow them to probe what that support could look like within the team, identify some core commitments, and then a framework to be put in place to evaluate and monitor. And a 360 is exactly what we've asked those individuals to commit to, or potentially commit to, in going in, to sort of build up, you know, to shift the baseline, you know, of what that interaction with others might be. So it's less about measuring it and more about making it happen for everyone's benefit. But
absolutely. No, I appreciate that. No, sorry, forgive me if I sounded like I was calling them crude measurements, but I realize it's a very difficult thing to measure. So it's around exactly that topic. But one other thing, if I can ask you, and I would take just and on one level, I agree with you completely, but I was also a bit concerned. You were very dismissive about impact factors of journals. And I also would totally agree. I think that, you know, in this day and age, we have the wherewithal to define the quality of a manuscript by how many times it's cited, what contribution it makes. So the journal is much less important. And while I agree with you on the upper end of the scale in terms of what we call impact factors, there's also a lot of very low quality publication outlets, predatorial and others, which are reflected well by low impact factors. So the outright dismissal of an impact factor, and I don't want to come across as a supporter of it. I don't think we need them anywhere near the way they were, but I do think at the lower end, they can actually be quite useful for saying, look, you know, people are just throwing papers into journals where you basically pay to get it published. And, you know, it's not just because something is in a big impact or a higher impact factor journal doesn't mean it's not good. It's I guess what I'm saying, and it's not equivalent. So there is some value, I would say, as a working research scientist in biomedical fields anyway, to say yes, absolutely. You know, just because it's in Nature doesn't mean it's a great paper. Just because it's in, you know, I won't. for risk of litigation, I won't say a journal title out loud, but you know what I'm saying, I think.
I do know what you're saying, and actually I agree with you. And actually, for full disclosure, I used to work for the Nature Publishing Group, and I worked for them for 12 years. So I have been on that side. And maybe my opinions came across more forcefully than I intended. I think what's really important in developing an output strategy is to think about which audience is it reaching, and how is that publication, how that editorial team going to help you reach that audience. Mm-hmm. And so what we've done in our DORA conversation starters, it's not about stating the obvious. In fact, we don't say, don't mention impact factor. In fact, our fear is that when people go DORA, they go, right, mustn't talk about journal. That's not true. In fact, we have an obligation to support each other, to think about, well, what research are you doing? What's advanced the field in this research? Who might be interested, and where might be the most influential venue to reach the audience?
Yeah.
At the other end, on the predatory journals, of course, we don't have the list, but there are questions that one can ask as to the quality of support and whether or not that journal is indexed, the level of editorial input that might dissuade you from publishing. And of course, these days, these issues are a bit moot when preprints are very plentiful. So why on earth pay when you can get it out there and get input from the community on your work? But that greater literacy around an output strategy is absolutely crucial. But from a culture perspective also, because as I said earlier, each discipline will have its own markers of what quality means, which are correct for the discipline and that need to emerge from discussions in the discipline. So you can't have me come along and go, it's about this. It's about the conversations that can be had locally that support peer support for recognizing what good outputs is.
Absolutely. And just as one final comment on that, I think one of the things that is very poorly gathered is the amount of work that academics put into review processes, which is very often, well, almost ubiquitously not recognized or picked up or included in everything from promotion through to likelihood of getting grants. And, a huge part of our job is to review the literature and to keep the quality at an international level high. So I think that's another thing that would be great if we could get a handle on how to measure.
Yeah, I think that maybe that's for your community rather than mine. But I think services to the community, I guess, where that comes under, is important. And actually, if you're signed up to things like pub lawns and so on, then and encouraging your colleagues to do the same, then you put that on public record, and it's not a question of you don't want to make it up. It's right there for people to see.
Yeah, great. Thanks very much. It was really informative and interesting talk. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Cormac. Great questions, great comments. And as a wider conversation, I think, the whole concept of academic publishing and research publishing, I think, has a certain role to play in these conversations as well beyond that. So, Maria, going to go to you next.
Yes, I have a simple and quick question. Firstly, thank you very much for a very interesting talk. I'm a professor of philosophy, but I also act as a PI and mentor a lot of young academics, postdocs, etc. So my simple question is, your very welcome emphasis on qualitative features of research, like collegiality, etc. Is that becoming a common practice in UK universities, or are you a pioneer in this area?
I think supporting the careers of others is, a bit of a movement. I suppose embedding that requirement into promotions criteria is a rarity, and we started there, because our community was asking us for that. But if you look at, for example, the new Wellcome Trust strategy, that is very much focused around a lot of the work that they have done around culture and around the country. And the 3 new schemes that they're going to be launching are not based around, but will require that demonstration as well. I wouldn't be surprised if the new people and culture strategy that's coming out from BASE, which is the government department in which UKRI sits, that will also emphasize, support for each other. So I see this as one activity, but it's going to be part of, I think, a broader movement. We're definitely going to see it in our next REF. So the environment section of REF is the one that's going to get the most attention. In Scotland, smaller zone, the Scottish Funding Council is undertaking a review of higher education and further education. And there's a people strand to that as well. And I think, they're quite interested in Scotland in creating that blueprint for culture for the nation. So I expect to see more of this popping up.
Yeah.
Thank you. Just to finish off, because I mentor people from Edinburgh, St. Andrews, I don't have anyone from Glasgow right now, but is it that I have to tell them something different than go and publish in the best journals in the field, or should I emphasize collegiality in my mentoring toolkit?
Yes, so St. Andrews, we work closely with Edinburgh and with St. Andrews, and in fact St. Andrews have got a a culture programme, and we sit on their steering group for that. So we are in contact with them all the time, and likewise with Edinburgh. So I think they would take kindly to that message.
Okay, thank you.
Very good. Thanks very much. I think it's probably true to say that as a sector in Ireland, perhaps that the UK are, maybe have considered these issues or begun to consider them earlier than we have. But of course, there will be a conversation about research happening in Ireland this year. So it's an opportunity for us, I think, to talk in that conversation about research culture and related issues as well. Peter Scott from UCD Research. Peter, you have a question there. Your hand's been up for a good while.
Hi, I was wondering from the outset, if the fundamental principles or ideas that were in the defined culture, did they have kind of broad approval from the start, or were some of them particularly controversial where you needed to have a lot of back and forth debate? And how did that play out? Did you win hearts and minds? Is there a quiet resistance to some aspects of this that you're still managing through? So, how did that play out?
Yeah, one of the points I made in my presentation was that there's no substitute for knowing your community. And when I came into this role 6 or 7 years ago, the first thing we were asked to do, and we were asked to do this, was to review each of our disciplines. And I thought, my first project is like reviewing the disciplines. So what we did was, rather than going out there with the measuring stick and the actual stick, what we did was we did a very participatory process. So we brought external advisors in, external panelists in, and we worked with each unit to develop their forward strategy, and for outputs, for impact, and for their environment. And that allowed us to liaise very closely with each discipline and find out where the issues were. And from the external panelists, what was the norm in the field? Where could we expect that discipline to be heading? And so a lot of the discussions around the environment that were had 32 times over, and then we did a second round again, fed into the definition of culture that I set out at the very beginning. We then consolidated that through a town hall with all sorts of members there, technicians, the unions were there, and so on. So there wasn't resistance. It was, clearly we weren't going to, chuck everything in there, but it was what we'd heard as we were going round. And it also partly aligned with the integrity work that we'd already started. And so it's quite natural for the things that we'd been doing to feature within our definition of culture. But there was not resistance. There wasn't resistance. I think, I'm just trying to think where, yeah. I mean, one of the things that we're starting to do now, as I mentioned at the beginning, is work on our open research. And I think, how we did introduce open research quite early on, and we the rumblings were this takes more time, this is, and so we left it for a wee while, and now we're going back out and we're doing it slightly differently. So I guess an acknowledgement that sometimes you test the waters and you see what you get and put it in the drawer until the right time is right, and then come out with it again. But it did come bottom up, but not in the, can you tell us what we need to put in culture? We could have gathered it through our tour of our units.
Thanks.
Good, thanks very much. Joan Tiernan, you had your hand up there. I think it's gone. I'm not sure if you still want to ask a question.
Thanks, Grace, and thanks, Tanita, for a fascinating walk through what culture needs to be and how it should be done. In fact, my question was partly anticipated. I was going to ask a process-related question about resistance and how you manage that piece, just with the view to getting some expectations about what the obstacles might be to rolling it out. So that we could anticipate those and plan around them, but you've answered that already. And the other question I thought I would like to raise was about you've been doing this for so long, you must have a sense of the bedding in process and how long that's taken and what the difficulties or issues might have been en route to that bedding in. And maybe you could tell us a little bit about that piece.
Yeah, I think on the subject of resistance, I'll just add one more thing, which is, and I mentioned it during my talk, and I think I mentioned it twice, but I want to mention it again, is the delivery teams. So you can have the best plan in the world, but if your people are not prepared to work with you or not available to work with you, then things will fall flat. So, start from who is available and willing and perhaps aligned ideologically with what you're trying to do, rather than hold your piece of paper and say, we're going through this list. Your question about bedding in. I probably don't come across as the most patient person, but honestly, in this particular plan, we were incredibly patient, and we were rewarded, actually. The clarity of communication, you know, and the fact that it was coming from the Vice Principal's office, and it was coming as a, you know, as an integral part of what we meant by research quality. It was about helping researchers to succeed, you know, and we said that all the time, you know, before the culture work, and it's just setting it in its proper context. What people really resist to, I think, is it's yet another thing. So where the message didn't land, and it was, you know, yeah, I agree, I like it, but it's yet another thing to do, then you got the pushback. And so you're forever realigning it and saying, no, you want to support careers, you want good outputs, you want to support impact, this is what this is about. And so the bit that I was saying at the very outset, where keep it focused, keep it unapologetically focused on research practice, that serves the interest of the academic. I mean, when I used to run the research office here, I would say, you know, your success is predicated on the success of the academics, right? We help them to succeed, and that's what they want to do, and they will listen to that. And then making it easy. So clarity of message, and then not expect them to do, you know, because if there's, you know, we've got whatever, you know, 5,000 of them, they're not going to go all off and make up what to do. So here's the policy, here's the intent, yes, you agree with it, and here's the tool. And we have been quite surprised that people who have aligned to this and made it their own, that we wouldn't have previously thought they would. And so you will see people come out of the woodwork. And like everything, there'll be the early adopters, the people who would have done it anyway, and then the people who will do it when they see others do it. And then the ones you will never reach, and I never worry about those because that's just the way things work. But things will go in stages. And what you will get if you're running it centrally, or if you're running it somewhere visible, is that people will come along and go, I don't know how I can help, but how can I help? And then maybe there isn't something for them just then, but there'll be something that comes up later and you can involve them, and that seeds some local area. One of the things you could consider doing, we have not done that yet, but is to almost have some funds there for people who want to do stuff locally in alignment with what you're trying to do. And it creates visibility for the agenda, and it allows you to select the areas that you would like to see it develop in, and support that financially. And that hopefully will help snowball some of these things. One other thing that we do quite effectively is to do some of the work in collaboration with our funders. You know, some people who already have contacts into that might be willing to take that conversation further. And it gives, especially in an academic sense, the profile with the funder. So it allows them to raise their profile while also doing something that helps the institution. And we've seen that a few times as well. So again, it's about having lots of ideas rather than and seeing where they land and what resonates with people.
I think that point about enabling things, making it easy for people to succeed rather than saying, here's another thing you have to do, because God knows we're all plagued with lots and lots and lots of other things we have to do and comply with and so on. And we don't want to make this another one of those. We want it to be something positive and a help. And the key is doing that, I think, in a way that is both inviting and helpful, but not off-putting. So let's see how we go. But
we never made anything obligatory. Now, of course, this might be different in your, maybe in some areas it might be it's only when you make it obligatory that you signal its importance. But we didn't do that. We didn't use that tool apart from with our PGRs and their integrity training. But that's a slightly different.
I think that's very wise and bring people along that way. There is one more comment, I think, from Tig in the chat there. Tig, you might like to come in on this again, and it's going back to I suppose the interaction with HR, and I think again coming from an arts and humanities point of view. Tig, would you like to comment further?
Yeah, I know it was just following up from what Derval was saying there, that, and relating back to what we were talking about with our own PR, with our own HR, that I think in arts and humanities, because in many ways, my experience as head of school is that, there's a very diffuse, and in some ways, actually the PIs are the easy ones, and they're doing their teams. But my experience in a large school was in a sense of creating that sense of engagement from people maybe who were mid-career researchers and who were kind of chugging along, and to refire up the enthusiasm there. So I just think, you know, it's another example of a discipline-specific approach that, you know, that there may be a model which works very well in science, but that might work very differently in ours. So.
Yeah. So again, I think very much reinforcing the need not to push everyone into a one-size-fits-all basket, and to appreciate and indeed celebrate the differences across disciplines and in interdisciplinary research as well. So I suppose at this point, we've just about 10 minutes left, and I'm just going to give you a flavour of the kinds of things that we have planned in our research culture initiative. I know we have members on the call here from our Responsible Conduct of Research Committee, people who are some of our research integrity champions. We've members from the Research Impact and Innovation Group of the University, and members from UCD Research, as well as others. And I think very much we hope that all of you and your colleagues will have a part to play in this initiative, because there's plenty of work, I think, for us all to do, and plenty of things we can all benefit from as well. So what we will be doing, project manager for 18 months, that will help to get us, help us to get these initiatives underway. One of the things we will be doing some kind of a climate survey, followed up by a series of World Cafe type events to consult around the university on what aspects of research culture can be optimized and how they can help us all achieve research excellence. We also hope to run a pilot scheme on what Cormac was referring to, a 360-degree evaluation for PIs who would like to take part. And in that way, they can invite not only external experts, but also their mentees to comment on how good a job they do about mentorship. And we see this not so much as an evaluation tool, of course it's going to be voluntary, but more as a tool for self-reflection and self-analysis, if you like, because a PI may think that all is rosy in the garden with mentees, and it's not until the mentees perhaps have this formal chance to explain, well, you know, Cormac, you're a great guy, but on Monday mornings, you know, you really, you're not easy to deal with. Something like that, I think, that enable people not to use it as a way to be assessed by others, but just to be self-aware. So that's another thing we hope to do. We hope to hold a conference as well, or a symposium at the end of this 18-month period, where we will showcase some of the things that we've done, and perhaps start this conversation or be part of this conversation about research culture in our sector in Ireland. And we hope, again, certainly, Tanita, we'd love to hear more from University of Glasgow colleagues in that conference when we get to that stage. We have also developed, or at least I should say Jill has developed, it's not published yet, but it will be soon, a really nice new website for research integrity, and a research culture website. And hopefully we'll unveil that in the next few weeks. And one of the things that we'll be featuring on there will be a suggestion box, an online suggestion box that anybody can come in and say to us, you know, would this not be a good idea? Because again, it's all about ideas and people's opinions. And unless we communicate together, we really won't know what we can do and what we can achieve together. So I would really like to echo what we've heard from our University of Glasgow colleagues, that research excellence and research culture very much go hand in hand. And research culture isn't about just saying everyone is great, let's be nice to everyone. It's not that at all. It's about helping everybody and more people to come into the research excellence sphere. It's enabling research excellence across our disciplines, across our organization, and across researchers of all different types and different career stages. So that's really where we're at. We look forward very much to interacting with all of you as the initiative develops. We think it's really important to communicate that out, what we're doing. And we know, of course, that communication in an organization as big and complex in UCD is probably one of the most difficult things we can do, because we've got so many channels of initiatives and communication coming into us. So really, we would like all of your help as our UCD research colleagues, as research integrity champions, our CRC committee, all of you on the call here today, to really help us to spread the word and to work with us in this really nice initiative. And I'm going to close by just saying thank you very much to Jill who is our administrative guru, I think, in research integrity, and also Adrian Otterwell, who is always a really wise voice and makes eminently sensible suggestions on all we do in research integrity and research culture. And finally, to Orla Feely, VP for Research Impact and Innovation, who has supported our initiative and I think has been definitely broadening our horizons and encouraging us to be ambitious as to what we can achieve in this sphere in UCD. So thanks everyone, and thanks Orla. And Orla, if you'd like to say a closing word, that would be very welcome as well.
Thanks very much, Grace. And again, I'm sorry that I missed the earlier part of the discussion, but I thought that was a really rich discussion. Thanks to all of you who are here. I mean, by your presence, you are showing your commitment to this agenda and therefore to our colleagues and to our institution. To all of you who've taken roles in the various committees and so on that are involved in this, we really appreciate your time. I think this is an enormously important endeavour for the university. I think it will make us much stronger as a university. Again, as Grace and Tanita pointed out, you know, excellence and a strong research culture are not in opposition to one another at all. They are absolutely supportive of one another. So this is where we hope to get to in UCD. We want to do better. We want everybody in our research community in UCD, from the president to an undergraduate student who sets foot inside a lab. We want them to be promoting a positive research culture and to be experiencing a positive research culture. So, you know, we hope that, and you've heard some of the really exciting initiatives that Grace and Jill and Adrian have planned. We hope that people will start to see this work on the ground, and we hope that it will support UCD to be a better institution. So thanks all again, and I look forward to continuing this conversation over the coming period.
Thanks very much, everyone. Thanks for coming, and we'll talk again soon, we hope. And thanks especially to Tanita for giving us a fantastic presentation, and thanks for being so open and helpful to us. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Bye.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye all.
That was very nice to see so many people, and thank you, Tanita, for sort of, we've heard you talk before, to have you there to spread the message.
No, it was good. I mean, I think by the engagement alone, I think you see the support. So that's really, really good.
Yeah, no, it was brilliant. It was brilliant. It was great to see so many people there, and from such a wide variety. I mean, there's 2 or 3 or more people from HR and everything, which is great, because I think it's really important that they can see where we're coming from. We have spoken with Rory before and Joyce, but you know, I think it's even better again to see what you're doing, and to see they can really get to understand why, you know, the suggestions we're going to come up with for them.
I mean, you heard some of the concern about survey fatigue. Yeah. Which is always a big thing. So you know, we'll have to tread carefully there. Nevertheless, I think it is something that we should do. And as you say, it's an easy way of capturing quite a lot of information quickly and having it available for analysis. So
yes, and yeah, I mean, and again, you know, that's why it all sort of has to fit with what, you know, your institution will tolerate. You know, I mean, you actually got a really good engagement rate with the survey. I'm not sure what will happen this year, because of course there've been all sorts of surveys around COVID.
I was going to ask again, you know, if that had changed as you went down the years. So we don't know what we'll get, and obviously it's still a strange year, isn't it? But we'll see. But you know, but maybe your town halls are another way of doing it, when you're actually for focus groups, or you know, I think there comes a point where you just have to stop asking and start doing, and just start doing something. Absolutely. I mean, I think even now, even before we do the survey, I think, you know, we have enough information to say, you know, there are some things we can do which will be useful and granular. And as you say, you don't have to do everything at once, nor should you. And it probably is best to pick off some easy things, low-hanging fruit first, and hard, you know, tackle the really difficult things which require loads and loads of people to
it require lots of people, and that are very difficult, and also you cannot almost do on your own. You need the sector. So one of the things that, of course, when people think about the research concordat, they think about research careers and contracts and precarity. But of course, the supply problem, I mean, I guess it's always the funder looking at the institution and the institution looking at the funder. It's your fault. But there's some things that we can do, but we can't solve the whole problem.
No, absolutely not.
So we're now looking at the profile of our contracts, how many people we've got, how many contracts they're on, what the average length of the contract is, who the funder is that are providing, contract lengths of different lengths, and looking to see what we can do. But it's going to be, it's going to be two-pronged. It's going to be what we're lobbying the sector about, and then